Exiled for her size, Zaina wandered the sands alone, until a scarred desert warrior crossed her path. Neither expected salvation, but in each other they found something the throne could never give: fire, fight, and a reason to survive. The sandals blistered her feet by midday. By nightfall they were gone entirely, torn from her in the scramble over jagged rock and searing dunes. Now her soles were raw and bleeding, her robe dark with sweat and sand. Zaina, once daughter of Pharaoh Atenhotep, heir to the opulent courts of Aset-Ka, now trudged through the wastes of Riham like a dying dog. Each step sunk her deeper into nothingness, and the desert, merciless and vast, had not blinked once. But she wouldn't fall. Not yet. Not while she could still feel the weight of her mother's ring digging into her palm. A circle of obsidian and gold, the last thing she'd stolen before the palace guards tossed her through the outer gates. She didn't wear it. She couldn't. But she held it like a curse. Her exile had come not with a blade but with a whisper, first in court, then in the halls, then from the lips of her father himself. Too large to marry, too soft to rule. That had been the final decree. The priestesses called it mercy. The soldiers called it duty. But Zaina called it what it was: betrayal. She had never once been ill, never once failed in her studies, never once shown weakness before her people. But her waist had grown and her chin had doubled, and so the gods had apparently withdrawn their favor. The Pharaoh wanted perfection, not loyalty, and certainly not her. Her steps faltered. She clutched her side, breath tearing through her chest. She could still hear their laughter, the courtiers, the eunuchs, even the slaves. Laughter as she was led out, robe dragging behind her like a funeral train. Let the desert test her resolve, they'd said. If the sun burns her away, then she was never meant for the gods. Well, the sun had done its best, but she was still here, limping, crying, cursing, alive. Then a sound, not wind, not sand, a grunt, short, sharp, male, and then a crack like bone or dry wood. Zaina dropped instantly, instinct taking hold before thought. She pressed herself flat behind a dune, heart thundering against the earth. More sounds, metal sliding, a hiss of pain. Then silence. She dared to peek. Below her, in the basin of a shallow ravine, two figures stood in opposition. One was already down, gurgling in the sand, limbs twitching weakly. The other, taller, darker, wrapped in desert leathers and stained cloth, stood panting, blood on his blade, dust in his hair. His face was hidden, his posture still. Zaina froze. The warrior, if that's what he was, turned his head slightly, and though she couldn't see his eyes, she felt him lock onto her presence instantly. Then he moved. Fast, too fast. Before she could blink, he was halfway up the ridge, climbing not like a man but like a jackal closing in on prey. Zaina stumbled backward, slipped, scrambled to rise, but he reached her before she could run. A hand on her shoulder, a knee between her legs. A blade, no, not a blade. Just his hand pressing against her mouth, firm but not cruel. His other hand rose, palm open. A gesture, a warning. "Stop," he rasped. His voice was low, cracked like sandpaper dragged across stone. "I won't harm you unless you scream." Zaina stared up at him, chest heaving, muscles trembling. The instinct to scream warred with the exhaustion pressing on her ribs like stone weights. She nodded once. The pressure eased. He looked at her then, truly looked. His eyes were dark, sunburnt around the edges, and his brow creased, not in disgust, not in judgment, but in confusion. He tilted his head. "You're not one of them." She shook her head. He gestured toward the body below. "You saw." She nodded again. He sighed. "Then we move, now, before others come." Her voice cracked. "I can't." "You will." He offered no pity, no explanation, just turned and began to walk. Zaina didn't move. He turned back, "Follow or die." And just like that she did. Her legs screamed, her throat burned, her pride bled out in silence, but she followed. He led her across a narrow path hidden between the dunes, walking as though he knew every grain of sand by name. Once, he paused, knelt, and swept a flat stone aside to reveal a small leather pouch. He tossed her a skin of water. She drank greedily until he took it from her hands. "Enough," he said. By nightfall, they reached a canyon ridge, wind-carved and cruel. A cave yawned in the stone like a wound. He gestured her inside. Only once they were out of the open did he speak again. "What's your name?" Zaina hesitated. "Zaina." He nodded, unsatisfied but accepting. "You." He paused, then, "Kale." Just that, no title, no family name, just Kale. Zaina sank to the cave floor. Her body was done, her mind not far behind, but she watched him as he moved, cleaning his blade, tending to a gash in his side, methodical, silent. Not once did he look at her with hunger or scorn. That alone made him more man than most she'd ever known. "Who was he?" she asked. Kale didn't look up. "Slave hunter." Her gut twisted. "Was he hunting me?" Kale's eyes flicked toward her. "Wouldn't be hard, pretty gold ring, no shoes, royal scent still on your skin, you scream noble." Zaina curled tighter into herself. She didn't respond. Kale didn't apologize. "I don't protect for free," he said after a long while. Zaina lifted her head. "I have nothing left." "Then earn it." "How?" He looked at her for a long time. "Live." Zaina didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face, her mother's back turning, the gates slamming shut, and then Kale's hand, not cruel, not kind, but firm, real. The next day brought no mercy. Kale rose early, woke her with a splash of cold water. "We move." "Where?" "South." "To what?" "Not death." That was enough. As they traveled, Kale spoke little but watched everything. He had a way of moving that seemed invisible, even in the open. Twice, he warned her of scorpions before she stepped. Once, he knocked her flat as a hawk dove overhead, its talons missing her scalp by a finger's width. She began to wonder if he was truly man at all. They camped near a dried oasis the second night. Kale made fire without flint and cooked lizard meat without flinching. Zaina tried to eat. She gagged. He said nothing, just passed her a handful of dried berries. "Small steps." She looked at him then, noticed the scars, old and new, the sunburn above his collar, the limp in his left leg. "You're not from here," she said. He didn't answer. "Why help me?" He shrugged. "You were alone." "That's all." "Should I have needed more?" She didn't know how to answer that. The third night brought the riders. Zaina had just started to doze when Kale's hand clamped over her mouth again. No words, just that hand and a finger raised to his lips. She nodded. Then she heard it. Hooves, not many, 2, maybe 3, soft but certain. Kale crept to the ridge, crouched low. Zaina followed behind him on all fours. What they saw made her blood run colder than the desert night. 3 men, all armed. One held a golden sash in his hand. "Her sash." Kale turned to her, eyes hard. "You were followed." The moment Zaina saw the sash fluttering in the torchlight, her body betrayed her, stomach twisting, throat drying, legs tensing like a hunted doe's. She hadn't even realized she'd lost it. It must have slipped free that first night, snagged on some jutting rock or thorn bush. And now it was a beacon. One that screamed, royal, female, weak. The man holding it smirked as he sniffed the gold-threaded silk, then tucked it into his belt beside a dagger shaped like a vulture's beak. Kale motioned her back. She crawled silently behind him, heart slamming against her ribs. She felt it even more than heard it. Kale's breathing had changed. Slower, sharper, measured, a hunter scenting blood. He pressed his lips to her ear. "Stay here, do not move, no matter what you hear." Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, vanished into the dark like smoke. Zaina curled tighter behind the ridge wall, fingers digging into stone until they bled. Below, the voices of the riders floated up through the silence. "Left a trail like a lame ox," one scoffed, kicking through the sand with his boot. "Pharaoh's women are all soft," said another. "She won't get far. We find her, we sell her. Might even get a bonus for returning her untouched." He laughed, but the sound was brittle, forced. Even these men feared the desert in their own way. The third rider said nothing. He just watched the shadows. And that was his mistake. Kale struck from above, silent as a falling hawk. The first rider didn't even scream, just a choking gurgle as Kale's blade slashed his throat open. Blood hit the fire with a hiss. The second reached for his weapon but found Kale's boot in his chest, knocking him backward. Then the warrior was on him, knee pressing into his ribs, forearm crushing his throat. The third tried to flee, smart, but Kale was faster. A flash of metal and the man fell screaming, a dagger in his thigh pinning him to the sand. He writhed, reaching for the hilt, but Kale knelt beside him calmly and twisted it. The scream stopped. Zaina didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until it burned. She crawled forward, trembling, unable to look away from the carnage. Kale stood over the bodies, breath steady, eyes scanning the horizon. "More might come," he said. She nodded, still frozen. He looked at her then, more sharply. "You dropped something." I didn't know." Kale pulled the sash from the dead man's belt and tossed it onto the fire. The gold threads curled, blackened, then vanished in flame. "No more royal marks," he said. "No more memories, only survival." She should have felt grief watching it burn. Instead, she felt clean, lighter. They didn't speak again that night. Kale kept watch. Zaina didn't sleep. Dawn was thin and gray when they moved again, this time cutting southward through a narrower pass, winding between slabs of red stone that looked like petrified gods. By midday, they reached an old ruin, half swallowed by sand. Broken pillars and crumbled walls jutted from the dunes like ribs of some buried beast. Kale led her through what remained of an archway and into a hollow chamber that still held some shade. "This was a temple," Zaina whispered, recognizing the faded sigils carved into the stone. "To Mahit, the weaver goddess." Kale grunted but said nothing. She ran her fingers over the wall, over a carving of Mahit with her hands outstretched, threading stars into the night sky. A memory stirred, her mother's voice reciting prayers, her own hands mimicking the goddesses, before it had all gone wrong. "Why was it abandoned?" she asked. "Because prayers don't grow crops," Kale said, dropping his pack, "or stop blades." Still, he didn't stop her from lighting the small incense cone she found buried in a corner. It lit with a faint hiss, releasing a scent she hadn't smelled in weeks, amber, myrrh, memory. They rested there. For a while it was quiet, peaceful even. Kale cleaned his weapons. Zaina drank, ate, and wrapped her feet with strips torn from her robe. They shared no words, but something in the silence was different now, less tense, more aware. They weren't strangers anymore. They weren't friends either, not yet, but something had shifted. Later, Kale motioned her outside. "We scout ahead," he said. "Cave dwellers in these hills." Zaina followed, slower now, her body stiff with bruises and exhaustion. They climbed the ridge above the ruins, moving from rock to rock, listening. At first all she heard was wind. Then a whistle, low, repeating, rhythmic. Kale dropped flat, so did she. "Signal," he said. "They're hunting." "For us." "Not yet, but if they see us." He didn't finish. Below, a group of 5 moved through the sand. Not riders, walkers. Lean, wrapped in dark rags, spears slung across their backs. One of them paused, sniffed the air, then pointed toward the temple ruins. Kale swore under his breath. "They picked up the blood." "From the fight." He nodded. "We can't go back. We cut west, through the Ash Valley." Zaina had heard of the Ash Valley, a dead zone, burned in some forgotten war where the ground whispered and the wind never stopped blowing. But she didn't argue. She followed. The ash began as dust, gray and soft, but the deeper they went, the darker it grew. Soon it coated their legs, their clothes, their mouths. Zaina could barely breathe. Kale wrapped a cloth around her face. She didn't know if it helped or just made the fear feel smaller. That night they found shelter beneath an overhanging rock shaped like a serpent's jaw. Kale lit no fire. Instead, he handed her a knife. "For what?" "If I fall asleep and something comes, use it." She stared at the blade, then at him. "What kind of something?" "Anything." He turned over, pulled his hood down, and was asleep in seconds. Zaina didn't sleep. She held the knife all night, hands shaking, ears tuned to every shift of sand. Nothing came, but by morning something had changed. Her fear didn't rule her anymore. It was still there, cold and jagged, but it was hers now. A weapon, not a cage. Kale noticed. He didn't say it, but she saw it in the way he handed her water first, in the way he walked half a pace behind now, not ahead. On the 5th day, the ash ended. They crested a ridge and saw it, a green line on the horizon, the edge of the Drasen River. Beyond it, trade routes, scattered towns, the borderlands where few asked questions and fewer offered answers. Kale stopped. "You make it there, you vanish." Zaina looked out over the landscape. "That's your plan, leave me there." "I kept you alive, that was the deal." She turned to him. "That was your deal." He said nothing. Then softly she added, "I don't want to vanish." Kale studied her, his face unreadable. Finally he said, "Then make yourself known." A strange tension hung between them, thicker than smoke, heavier than silence. She didn't look away. That night before sleep took them, Zaina asked, "What happens if I stay with you?" Kale didn't answer right away. "Then you learn to kill, to hide, to lose everything again." She smiled faintly. "Sounds like home." But before she could say more, before the fire burned low, a sound echoed in the valley below. Horns, not many, but loud, clear. Kale's eyes snapped open. Zaina stood, already knowing. "They found us again," she said. Kale nodded, rising slowly, unsheathing his blades. "They're not going to stop." "Neither will I," she said. They turned toward the darkness, together. The horns didn't blare for long. That was the trouble with royal hunters. They signaled first, thinking it a kindness, a warning, a statement of superiority. But in the desert, sound carried like blood in water. It betrayed more than presence. It betrayed distance, direction, numbers. Kale counted 2 horns, no more than 6 riders then, but 6 was enough. 6 was dangerous, especially here with no cliff face to trap them against, no ruins to vanish into. Zaina watched him, waiting for orders. He noticed that. She didn't flinch, didn't beg, she waited. "Downhill," Kale said, tightening the wraps around his arms. "We take the hard sand, quieter." Zaina didn't ask questions, she just moved. They slid down the far side of the ridge in silence, their shadows long in the rising moonlight. Below them the plain stretched vast and silver, broken only by outcroppings of rock and the dried spines of forgotten trees. Kale's eyes scanned for movement, for reflections off blades or saddles. Nothing yet. But the silence felt thinner now, like it could split open at any moment and pour out the chaos they both knew was coming. Half an hour later they reached the river's edge. The Drasen was low this season, nothing but a winding thread of brackish water cutting through thick reeds and mosquito-clouded banks. On the other side, land, not safety, not peace, but a chance, a life. Zaina dropped to her knees and cupped water into her mouth, letting it burn her tongue. She didn't care. Kale didn't drink. His eyes never left the ridge behind them. Then the stillness broke. A sharp snap, hooves fast close. Kale didn't wait. He grabbed Zaina by the waist and flung her into the reeds. She hit the mud hard but stayed down. He drew his blades, dropped low, and vanished. 2 riders crested the ridge moments later, silhouettes framed in starlight. One held a lantern high, the other had a bow strung across his chest. They scanned the riverbank, laughing, mocking. "Too slow, too soft," one said. "She'll be stuck in the muck, probably begging for help already." "Or drowned," the other replied. Kale stepped out from the shadows like a ghost. "You came too far." The first rider reared back in surprise, nearly losing his grip on the reins. The second fumbled for his bow, but Kale was already moving. Blade met thigh, tendon snapped. The man screamed as he tumbled from his saddle. The lantern fell, shattering on a rock, flame licking up into the reeds. Zaina covered her mouth as smoke surged around her. The world became flicker and fire. The second rider charged, sword high. Kale didn't back down. He dodged left, rolled under the horse's chest, and struck the beast's leg with the butt of his hilt. The animal reared, threw its rider, then bolted into the darkness. Kale advanced on the fallen man, who crawled backward, blade lost, blood leaking from his thigh. "Please," the man gasped. "I was just orders, I was just—" Kale raised his sword. "No mercy," Zaina said behind him. He turned. She stood, robes blackened by soot, eyes bright with something new. Kale didn't kill the man. He let the blade hover an inch from his throat. "Tell them," Kale growled. "She's not yours, she never was." The man nodded rapidly. "Run." And he did. Zaina expected Kale to scold her, to say something about weakness, about strategy, about how emotion got people killed. But he didn't. He looked at her for a long moment, then just nodded once, an agreement between warriors. They crossed the river that night. The land beyond was different, not kinder but less watchful, fewer eyes, fewer gods. Kale led them west toward the scattered camps that dotted the trade spine, a stretch of nomadic settlements, caravans, smugglers, outcasts. If Zaina was going to vanish, this was the place. But she wasn't vanishing. Each day they walked, she grew stronger. She learned to bind her feet, to find water by scent, not sight, to use a knife not just to stab, but to cut clean, quiet. Kale trained her when they rested, swift, hard drills, no words, no coddling. She bruised, she bled, she cursed, but she never stopped. By the time they reached the edge of the spine, she could throw a dagger within a hand's width of her target. Kale said nothing of it, but she saw the shift, in how he walked beside her, not ahead, in how he let her choose when to break camp, in how he stopped shielding her from danger. They arrived at a trade post on the fourth week. It was barely a village, just a ring of tents and a fire pit surrounded by wagons. But to Zaina, it felt like civilization. Kale kept his hood low, his blade visible. People parted when they saw him. Zaina walked close, unsure whether to be afraid or proud. They stopped at a trader's tent, an old woman with sharp eyes and sharper fingers. "Looking for anything?" she asked, voice like old leather. "Information," Kale said. "Expensive." Kale tossed a bloodstained token onto the table. It bore the mark of the Pharaoh's hunters. The old woman paled, then nodded. "They passed through last night, asking about a girl, said she was big." Zaina didn't flinch, but the woman looked at her now, longer, deeper. "You're her." Zaina met her gaze. "Do I look like I'm running?" The old woman smiled slowly. "No, no, you don't." They spent the night there. Kale stayed outside the tent, keeping watch. Zaina slept inside, not quite trusting the silence. But just before dawn she heard voices. Not Kale's, not the trader's, new, urgent. She crept out to find Kale surrounded, 5 men, armed, tense. He hadn't drawn his blades yet, but he was coiled like a spring. Zaina stepped forward. "What is this?" One of the men turned, young, well-fed, nervous. "Pharaoh's decree," he said. "The girl belongs to the sands." Kale moved, but Zaina beat him to it. She stepped between them, chin high. "I belong to no one." The man raised his hand. She didn't flinch. Kale stepped beside her, dry. A beat, then the men backed away. But they weren't done. That night the trader returned with news. They'll be back with more. Kale looked at Zaina. "You have a choice, run now or stay and fight." Zaina didn't hesitate. "I stay." Kale nodded. "Then you'll need more than knives." They left the next day for the Salt Cliffs. an ancient war site where weapons, armor, and traps from 100 forgotten battles lay buried in sand and bone. Kale knew a place. He always did. They scavenged, they trained. Zaina learned to fight in silence, to kill without hesitation. And through it all, something else grew. Not just survival, not just fire, but feeling. Kale never touched her, but he watched her differently now. And she him, the way he moved, the way he bled without complaint, the way he never asked for thanks. The way he looked at her, not with pity, not with judgment, but with recognition. And then one night, when the wind howled too loud and the stars felt too close, Zaina touched his face. He didn't pull away. "Why do you stay?" she whispered. He didn't speak. Instead, he placed her hand over his heart. That was enough. But the peace did not last. Not a day later, a scout found them, too young, too eager. Kale caught him, but not before he lit a signal flare. Now they would come, all of them. Zaina didn't flinch. Let them. Kale just smiled. You're ready. They didn't speak much in the hours that followed the flare. There was no need. Some silences were heavier than war drums, and in the hollow stretch of sky between dusk and dawn, that silence wrapped around them like armor. Kale checked the traps, each one buried with care, each one rigged to kill. Zaina gathered what she could from the salt cliffs, shards of bone, twisted iron, lengths of brittle chain. It wasn't much, but she knew now that survival didn't come from having much. It came from knowing how to use very little very well. The first sign of them came at midday. A dust plume. Far off, barely a thread on the horizon, but it was steady. It meant they were organized, measured, not the chaos of scattered riders, but something planned, intentional. Zaina stood on the ridge watching it come. Kale stood beside her. You still want to stay? She looked at him. You asked me that already. His jaw flexed slightly as if suppressing something, a smile maybe, maybe fear. That night they did not sleep. They moved through the jagged valleys, stringing snares and choke points, breaking rock to scatter sharp fragments along the narrowest paths. Kale taught her how to coat arrows in poison from the thorn-spitting bushes that grew like veins along the salt. Zaina didn't flinch as she handled them. She hadn't flinched in days. When dawn came, the sky was overcast, thick with wind. A bad omen for some, Kale had said once, but to them it was perfect. Wind would hide scent, muffle footsteps, blow sand into eyes and mouths and lungs. By noon they heard them. Boots, hooves, the metallic jingle of weapons too polished for desert use. Kale crouched low behind a slab of stone. Zaina was beside him, bow in hand, two blades strapped to her back. She wore no royal gold now, no painted coal, just rough leather, hardened palms, and a stare that burned like fire. They'll come through the gorge, Kale whispered. That's the bottleneck. Zaina nodded, and then they die. It was not arrogance, not even hope, just fact. The first soldier rode in laughing. He didn't see the pit trap. By the time he screamed, he was already falling. The spears below met him with a wet crunch. The second saw the fall, tried to wheel around, but his horse hit one of the glass shards laid across the sand. It reared, screaming, and flung him into the rocks. The third didn't fall, he ran. Smart but not fast enough. Kale's arrow took him clean in the back of the neck. That left 8. They regrouped quickly just outside the gorge, shouting orders in a dialect Zaina barely recognized. Kale was already moving again, silent, swift, like a shadow unbound. Zaina followed, heart hammering, hands steady. She took position on the far ridge, hidden behind a narrow cleft. The enemy moved in a wedge, slow, cautious now. They sent a scout ahead, this one young, barely a man. She watched him creep along the rock face, scanning the ground. She should have shot him, it would have been easy. But he reminded her of her brother. She let him pass. He never saw Kale waiting above. The fight that followed was chaos. They struck from both sides, blades from the dark, arrows from the cliffs. Zaina aimed for joints, for throats, just like Kale had taught her. One arrow, one kill, she didn't think, didn't doubt. By the time the sun dipped low, only 3 remained. One had lost an arm. He crawled toward the river, sobbing. Another was pinned beneath his horse, choking on dust. The third, their leader, stood in the center of the killing field, sword in hand, staring at Kale. Zaina recognized him. Not by face, but by stance. The way his shoulders squared, the way his eyes dismissed her entirely. She knew that kind of man. She'd eaten dinner beside him once, dressed in gold, pretending she didn't see the way he looked through her. "You," he spat at Kale, "you're the reason she's not dead." Kale didn't reply. "She's nothing," the man hissed. "A bloated relic. You think you've saved her. She'll never be free, not from what she is." Zaina stepped down from the ridge, slowly, deliberately. "I'm not trying to be free," she said. The man turned to her. "I am free." Then she drew her blade. He sneered, "You wouldn't last 1 round." "Then come find out." He lunged. She didn't back down. They met in the center of the gorge, blades clashing, feet dancing over blood-slicked rock. He was faster, taller, stronger, but she was quieter, smarter, and angrier. He slashed her arm. She drove her knife into his side. He elbowed her hard in the jaw. She twisted, flipped, and cut his thigh clean open. They broke apart, panting. "You don't belong out here," he said, staggering. Zaina looked at Kale, then back at the man. "I don't belong anywhere." Then she stabbed him through the heart. The silence afterward was deafening. The last 2 enemies lay still. The wind picked up, scattering dust across the corpses. Kale walked over, checked her wound, nothing deep. Then he looked into her eyes. "You didn't hesitate," he said. "No," she replied, "I didn't." He didn't smile, not really, but his eyes did. They buried the bodies in the gorge, out of respect, not regret. Kale built a cairn of stones while Zaina cleaned her blade. They didn't speak much. But as dusk fell and the stars began to shimmer, she said softly, "They'll send more." "Yes," Kale agreed. "And after them more." He nodded. "But I'll be ready." He didn't argue. Instead, he walked to the edge of the gorge and stared out at the desert. Then, without looking at her, he said, "This is where I was born, the salt cliffs, the ash valley, all of it." Zaina moved to stand beside him. "I thought warriors like you didn't come from anywhere." Kale was quiet for a long time. "I had a sister," he said finally. "She died when we were children, too weak. The sand took her. I was meant to die next." Zaina didn't speak. She let him go on. "But I ran, learned to fight, to take, to kill, to survive. I swore I'd never protect anyone again." He looked at her now. "Until you." Zaina's voice was soft. "Why me?" He didn't answer with words. He just reached for her hand, rough palm against her calloused one, and squeezed it. They didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, they packed what little they had and began walking west. They passed through the Valley of Ghosts, where old bones lay white beneath sun-bleached banners. They crossed the fire dunes, red sand that burned your feet through your boots. They braved the Wailing Gorge, where wind screamed like the dying. And through it all, they did not break. At a border town, Kale bartered a dead man's ring for horses. Zaina traded a tooth from one of the fallen for new boots. They were almost ready. Almost. But on the 7th night, they stopped in a place called Saphir's Hollow, a town carved into the side of a canyon. Safe, hidden, full of exiles. And there everything changed. A messenger found them. Not a hunter, not a soldier. A girl barefoot, dusty. She brought a scroll sealed with the Pharaoh's crest. Kale opened it with caution. Zaina read it with disbelief. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a bounty. It was an invitation. A plea. Her father, it said, was dying. He wanted to see her one last time. She laughed bitterly, then read it again. Kale didn't speak. Finally she said, "It's a trap." "Maybe," he said. "But what if it's not?" He looked at her carefully. "Do you want to go?" She didn't know. But in her chest something ached. Not for the throne, not for vengeance. But for answers. For truth. For the little girl who once prayed to Mahit and believed the stars could be sewn back together. So she said yes. And Kale nodded. "Then we ride at dawn." Dawn didn't rise gently that day. It clawed across the sky like a god angry at being forgotten, bleeding light into the canyon and burning the darkness away. Zaina stood at the cliff's edge, arms wrapped around herself, watching the shadows retreat from Saphir's hollow like cowards from a battlefield. Behind her, Kale saddled the horses in silence, every motion precise, final. Neither spoke much. Words felt too small for the weight of the journey ahead. They left before the town fully woke, hooves muffled against the canyon stone. Zaina didn't look back. Saphir's hollow had offered safety, anonymity, even a strange peace. But none of those things had ever been hers to keep. They were borrowed comforts, easily reclaimed by fate. And fate, she knew now, was not kind. The road to the capital wasn't marked. Not anymore. When Zaina had left, it had been paved with caravans, silk-draped palanquins, and lines of soldiers in gold. Now it was cracked stone and wind-swept ruins. Villages once loyal to the crown had collapsed into dust, and the temples, those ivory towers built to honor her ancestors, stood hollow and abandoned. Faith, it seemed, had shifted with the sand. Kale rode ahead, leading them through dry ravines and blackened oases. He never asked if she was certain. He didn't need to. The certainty was in her eyes, in her posture, in the silence that stretched between them, not empty but resolute. She wasn't going home. She was walking into the bones of a life that had tried to bury her. By the third night, the palace walls appeared like ghosts on the horizon. Massive, gilded, cracked at the edges. Zaina felt her chest tighten. The last time she'd seen those walls, she'd been on the inside, choking back tears as her father pronounced her unfit for the court. They'd dressed it in ritual, called it a purification, but everyone had known. The priests whispered about her size, her softness. Nobles smiled with their mouths and sneered with their eyes. And her father, the Pharaoh, chosen of the sun, had let them. "Wait here," Kale said as they reached the old path near the lower aqueduct. "Let me go first." Zaina didn't argue. She watched him vanish into the dusk like a shadow, silent and sure. He would find a way in. He always did. She waited, minutes stretched, then hours. When he returned, his face was carved from stone. "They're expecting you," he said. "No guards at the gate, just one priest, old, unarmed." Zaina blinked. "And my father?" Kale hesitated, alive for now. The palace was both smaller and larger than she remembered. The gold still gleamed, but only in patches. Mosaics had crumbled. Gardens lay dry and dead. Servants moved like ghosts, silent, thin, eyes downcast. No music, no laughter. The court had rotted from the inside, its opulence now a brittle mask barely hiding decay. The priest who met them was older than dust, bent nearly double, with a voice like dry papyrus. "Princess Zaina," he whispered, his eyes wet, "we feared you would never return." "I was told never to," she said. He winced. "The Pharaoh regrets many things." Kale didn't move from her side. They led her through the silent halls to the Chamber of the Sun, a room once filled with incense and draped silks. Now it was bare, save for a single low bed and the skeletal figure lying atop it. Her father. He looked smaller than she remembered, shrunken, fragile. His eyes were the only part of him still sharp. "Zaina," he rasped. She didn't bow. "You summoned me," she said. "I did." "Why?" A long silence, then because I was wrong. She didn't flinch. "You said I was unfit, too soft, too large to rule. You called it exile." His gaze flickered. "I was afraid," he whispered. "The court, they wanted someone perfect, someone the gods would not mock. And you agreed." He closed his eyes. "I see now that they were afraid of your strength, and I was too weak to fight them." It might have been true, but it didn't matter. "I'm not here for apologies," Zaina said. "You're dying, what do you want?" He didn't answer at first. "Then there are no heirs left, your brothers, gone to war, never returned. The priests divided. I need someone to hold the kingdom until the gods choose anew." She laughed then, sharp and bitter. "You want me to fix what you broke?" "No," he said, eyes open again, glowing like embers. "I want you to survive it." Zaina stood in silence. The man before her was not the tyrant who had banished her, nor the father she had once tried to love. He was something else, a warning, a prophecy. "Your name still holds weight," he murmured. "Take it, take the throne." "I don't want it." "Then burn it, do whatever you must, but don't walk away again." And then he closed his eyes, and the breath left him like a candle blown in the wind. He was gone. Zaina didn't cry. She turned and left the room without looking back. Kale met her in the courtyard. "Well," he asked. "He's dead. And he wants me to take the throne." Kale didn't react. He just looked at her, waiting. "What do you want?" he asked. Zaina stared at the sky. Clouds had begun to gather, thick and dark. "I want them to know I survived." That night the palace lit up again. Not with music, not with ritual, but with truth. Zaina stood at the top of the steps before the temple square, wrapped in black, her eyes hard as obsidian. The courtiers gathered, trembling. The priests chanted her name with uncertain voices. She raised her hands. "Your Pharaoh is dead," she called, "and I am what remains." Murmurs, shouts, fear, rage. "You exiled me for being too much," she said, her voice rising like thunder. "Too large, too stubborn, too alive. You said I would never return, but here I am, not in chains, not in shame, but with fire." The sky cracked open, rain began to fall. And the people listened. Not because they were told, but because they believed. The weeks that followed were chaos. Some nobles fled, some begged forgiveness, some plotted. Zaina didn't rule like her father. She burned half the royal laws, opened the gates to the exiled, dismantled the guards' towers. She let the poor eat first, gave women seats in the temple, taught the children to read not just myths but maps, medicine, mathematics. Kale watched all of it from the shadows, never asking for a place beside her, only ensuring she kept it. But the quiet didn't last. On the 30th night, the outer city burned. Rebels, loyalists, it was never clear who started it, only that it spread fast. Kale led the defenses, Zaina held the gates. And then, just when the fires had been choked out, when hope had begun to glimmer again, an assassin slipped through the servants' corridor. Zaina was alone when he struck. A blade to her throat. Too fast to scream. Too fast for fear. But not too fast for Kale. He was there somehow, his sword flashing, cutting the air with a sound like thunder. The assassin fell in a heap of blood and bone. Kale turned to her. "You're bleeding." She looked down, just a scratch. He reached for her, hands rough but careful. "You saved me," she said. He met her eyes. "I always will." She touched his face. And then finally she kissed him. The world didn't stop. But it changed. That night in the quiet between storms, Zaina took his hand and led him to the Chamber of Stars, the old queen's room, long abandoned. And there, surrounded by whispers of ancestors and the scent of rain, she chose him. Not as a warrior, not as a guardian, but as a partner, as a future, as a flame she would never again let go. The city never truly slept after the fire. It learned to whisper in its own ruins, rebuild in the silence, flinch at the wrong kind of wind. And at its heart, Zaina moved like a storm just barely leashed. She stood taller now, not because her body had changed, but because it hadn't and she'd stopped wishing it would. She no longer hid behind robes spun in shame. She wore what she pleased, armor and silks mixed, a queen made from both blade and bloom. The people began calling her El Tahara, not just clean, as the old priests meant it, but cleansed, reborn by fire and choice. They whispered it with reverence now, not mockery. Kale remained ever at her side, but never in her shadow. He took no title, asked no reward. His loyalty was in his watchfulness, the quiet way his eyes followed everyone who came within arm's reach of her. Zaina once teased that he trusted no one but her. He hadn't denied it. Trust, Kale believed, was earned in pain and proven in blood, and both had been spilled. The rebellion had fractured but not vanished. Its leaders moved like smoke, unseen everywhere. A merchant caught with forged edicts, a minor noble with poisoned wine, even one of the royal scribes slit throat by his own ink blade. Every week brought new threats wrapped in silence. And still, Zaina did not relent. She opened the lower vaults of the palace, places sealed for generations, and found grain enough to feed the starving wards through the dry months. She sent runners to the outer provinces, promising safe passage for any exiled scholar, priest, or worker willing to return. The courtiers grumbled. The high priests muttered, but the people, they gathered, listened, changed. Kale remained skeptical. Change breeds enemies. Zaina met his gaze across the strategy table one night, her fingers stained with ink, her eyes bloodshot. Then let them come. Let them see what I've become. He didn't smile, but something flickered in his expression, a pride he didn't often let show. That same night, a scout returned from the southern watchtowers. They were coming. Not rebels, not thieves, but a caravan. Massive, organized. Royal banners, but none from her line. The emissary bore no gifts, only a single sealed letter and a request for entry. Zaina read the letter alone in the sun chamber. Her lips parted when she saw the signature. Queen Thalith of Varu, the last true blood of the Riverlands, a rival kingdom, a former enemy, and once the only court that had extended an olive branch after Zaina's banishment. The letter was simple. We've heard the Pharaoh is dead. We've heard his daughter lives. We wish to speak to her, not her crown. Zaina handed it to Kale without a word. He read it twice. She's testing you. Yes. She's not coming to kneel. No. He looked at her then, expression unreadable. Will you kneel? Zaina shook her head. I'll sit, I'll listen, but I won't kneel. 3 days later, Queen Thalith entered the palace without fanfare. No guards, no dancers, just herself, cloaked in sand-hued silk, and 2 advisors. Her face was lined by age but brightened with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. I remember you, she said as Zaina approached. You were 12. You fell asleep during my envoy's speech. You were long-winded, Zaina replied. Thalith laughed. I hoped you'd live. I see you've done more than that. Zaina offered her a seat, poured tea herself, breaking 1,000 years of etiquette in one quiet motion. The other queen raised an eyebrow. Brave. I don't need protocol to protect me. No, Thalith said, her eyes sliding to Kale where he stood in the shadows. I suppose you don't. The negotiations were slow, deliberate. Thalith wanted trade routes reopened, yes, but she wanted more, a military alliance, a cultural exchange, and something neither had spoken aloud, a bridge between dynasties long at odds. "We've watched your rise," Thalith said one evening. "You've done what few dared, but your people bleed. Your enemies multiply. You need allies. And you want what in return? Your legacy." Zaina didn't flinch. "You want to marry me off." Thalith didn't deny it. "I have grandsons. I have no interest in being anyone's pawn." "I'm not offering you a collar," Thalith said softly. "I'm offering you a crown beside another. No one forgets their first queen." Zaina was silent a long time. That night she didn't sleep. She wandered the halls of the palace, the ones that hadn't changed since her girlhood, the ones that had watched her fall and rise again. In the moonlit reflection of the fountain she saw herself, not the girl who had been cast out, not the warrior she'd become, but something new, something still forming. Kale found her by the old library gates. He said nothing at first. "Then you're thinking of accepting." "I'm thinking of peace," she said. He didn't react. "But not at the cost of myself." He nodded once. "You think I'm wrong?" "No," he said, "but I think peace offered with a leash is still war, just slower." Zaina turned to him. "I chose you," she said quietly. "I never forgot." "Then don't let me forget who I am." He stepped closer, rough hands brushing hers. "You are the storm they feared, the fire they tried to smother. You are not meant to sit beside power. You are meant to be it." Her heart ached at his words. And then, a horn. Not from the city. From the mountains. Kale's face turned to stone. Another scout, breathless, bloodied, rode through the gates minutes later. "The north wall," he gasped, "siege towers." Zaina's eyes went cold. "Whose banners?" "No banners." She didn't hesitate. "Ready the gates, evacuate the outer rings, bring every healer, every smith, we hold the inner wall." Kale was already moving, barking orders. But she grabbed his arm. "Don't leave my side tonight." He met her gaze, jaw tight. "Never." By nightfall, the sky was black with smoke. And then the arrows came. They fell like rain, silent, precise, each one tipped with obsidian dipped in venom. Zaina stood on the battlements, robes tucked, sword at her hip, eyes narrowed. "They're not here to sack the city," Kale said beside her. "They're here to kill me." She nodded, "Good." Then she shouted down to the defenders. "Let them come." They fought through the night. Not for a throne. Not for history. But for a future none of them had yet dared to believe in. Zaina held the gate long after her sword arm went numb. Kale bled from a gash across his ribs but still stood at her back. The invaders never revealed their faces, masked, swift, coordinated. Assassins, not soldiers. But they hadn't planned for her. She was fire, and fire once unleashed did not kneel. When the last of them fell, arrow to the eye, thrown by a boy barely 10, Zaina dropped to her knees. Not from pain, not from defeat. From relief. They had survived. Again. But then Kale staggered. She caught him just before he collapsed. Blood soaked his tunic. Not from the gash. From something deeper. Darker. A wound she hadn't seen. His breath was shallow. Zaina screamed for the healers. They came. Worked. Prayed. She waited. Waited. But the light in his eyes dimmed. And then, he stopped breathing. Her world narrowed to the space between heartbeats. And the silence that followed was not peace. It was grief. Pure. Untamed. Time fractured, broke apart like old pottery dropped on a stone floor. There was no sunrise, no moonset, no rhythm in Zaina's world after Kale's breath stopped. She didn't cry at first, didn't scream. She just sat there holding his head in her lap, fingers combing through hair now damp with sweat and blood. The healers whispered, not daring to meet her gaze. One of them, the youngest, mumbled that they had tried everything, that the poison must have been from the Eastern Isles, slow-working, deep-burning. Zaina didn't respond. She couldn't hear him through the weight in her chest, the quiet that roared like the ocean inside her ears. The palace kept moving around her. The wounded were carried off, the banners removed, the gates inspected, and she still sat there, a living monument to the moment everything broke again. It took the old priestess, the one who'd buried her father, to finally approach and kneel beside her. "Daughter of Flame," she whispered, "he would not want to leave you like this." Zaina looked at her. And then, finally, she let herself fall. Not to the ground, but into grief. It came in waves, wild and choking. She screamed, not words, not curses, just the sound of something being torn from the center of her soul. The sound of love lost when it had only just begun to bloom. She screamed until her voice bled, until the walls themselves seemed to shake. And then she went silent again. They took his body at dusk, wrapped it in the royal linen she once thought too good for someone like her. But Kale had always deserved more than silk. He deserved songs, stories, the kind of legends men once gave to kings. She followed them to the tomb prepared for generals, but when they reached it, she shook her head. No. They paused. She walked past the tomb, down to the temple lake. The moon hung heavy above, its reflection trembling across the water. "Build a pyre," she said, "here." "But—" "He was never a man of stone," she said, voice raw. "He was fire, give him back to it." The guards obeyed. They stacked the dry wood in silence, layer upon layer, and laid his body atop it, his sword placed across his chest, the hilt wrapped in red cloth. She lit the torch herself, hands steady. And when the flames reached him, she stood alone before them, unmoving, unspeaking, until nothing remained but ash. That night no one in the city sang. No drums, no flutes, only wind. By morning, she was already in the war room. Eyes red, voice low, spine straight. "They're still out there," she said, "whoever sent them." Her advisors, those who had not fled during the fire, looked at her with something approaching awe, not just because she had survived, but because she had risen. "There was no sigil," said Akar, her chief scout. "But the design of the poison, the way they moved, it matches the records from the Eastern files." Zaina nodded. "The Isles." "Not the Isles themselves," said Nessa, her foreign envoy. "A faction, a splinter cult." "The Sons of the Hollow Moon," Zaina said quietly. The room went still. "That's a ghost story," muttered one of the older scribes. "No," she said, "it's not." Kale had spoken of them once in whispers and curses. Men trained in secret temples, warriors who believed the old gods had been betrayed by the Pharaoh's line. They didn't want power. They wanted undoing, to take the kingdom and grind it into dust. They had waited centuries, hiding, training, poisoning roots until the whole tree could fall. Zaina stood. "Find me their names," she said. "Find their temples. Find their mouths and the blades they used to cut them open. I want every thread of this cult ripped out before it spreads further." They scattered. She turned to Nessa. "And send word to Queen Thalith. Tell her the alliance is accepted." Nessa blinked. "Which grandson will you take?" Zaina's eyes didn't waver. "None. But I'll sign the accord. I'll build the trade bridges. I'll even train her soldiers beside mine. But I marry no one out of convenience. I gave my heart once. I will not divide what's left of it between politics." Nessa bowed. Weeks passed. Zaina ruled like a storm walking on glass, careful but unstoppable. She answered every threat with strategy, every whisper with action. And though her voice was softer now, every word carried weight. Her people saw her not as a broken woman, but as a whole one who had survived being shattered. She began to write at night. not edicts, letters, to Kale. She left them in the Chamber of Stars, the room where they had first chosen each other. And though no one read them, the servants said the room smelled always of smoke and cedarwood, as if something remembered had refused to leave. One night, while reading maps by candlelight, a tremor ran through the palace. Subtle, then stronger. Zaina stood. Another quake. The guards rushed to her side, but the quake wasn't from beneath. It was from within. A scream echoed through the lower halls. Metal clanged. Then another scream, this one from the upper towers. Chaos, panic, something was wrong. She didn't wait. Sword at her side, she ran toward the sound, down past the throne room, through the ancient kitchens and into the catacombs. What she found there stopped her breath. The tombs were open, ransacked, and at the center of the desecration stood a boy no older than 15, shaking, blood on his hands, eyes wild. "They came through the walls," he sobbed. "They said the gods were angry, that the Pharaoh's line had betrayed the balance." Zaina knelt beside him. "Who?" she asked gently. He trembled. "They wore bone masks, said the fire hadn't burned hot enough, that the storm still had to fall." Before she could ask more, the boy slumped, unconscious, breathing but shallow. The sons of the hollow moon weren't done. They had tested her walls. Now they were inside them. That night she gathered the royal guard, the priestesses, the scribes, even the cooks and torchbearers. She stood before them in the grand atrium where once her father had given sermons about divine will. She gave no sermon, only truth. "They come in the dark," she said, "with knives and symbols. They call themselves the end of our story." She paused. "I am not the end, I am the after." She raised her sword. "Let them come." They didn't wait long. By dawn, smoke rose from the east wing. But the city was ready. And Zaina stood atop the palace wall, Kale's blade at her back, her own fire lit deep in her chest. When the cultists broke through the gates expecting panic, they found traps, arrows from rooftops, boiling oil, and a queen at the front, not hiding behind soldiers but leading them. The battle lasted hours. The palace turned into a maze of blood and chants. But slowly, inch by inch, the cult fell. They had trained for a kingdom in fear. They had not trained for one with hope. When the last of them was dragged before her, mask broken, robes soaked in failure, he laughed. "You think you've won," he spat. "You are alone." Zaina stepped forward, placed Kale's blade at his throat. "I was alone before I ever met you," she said. "But I am not empty. I am not weak. I am not afraid of being unloved." She looked behind her. The city stood. The people stood. Kale's memory stood. And in that moment she understood. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And she was no longer anyone's daughter. She was queen. The city healed in silence. No songs, no parades, just the steady rhythm of rebuilding. Zaina did not crown herself with ceremony, she worked. Stone by stone, law by law, trust by trust. She ruled not as a daughter of a pharaoh, but as a woman who had clawed her way into legend. Kale's death left a hollow in her, but not a void. His sword hung in the hall of judgment, wrapped in red linen. His name became a vow whispered by soldiers before battle. She kept his memory alive not in mourning, but in motion. Letters came from distant kingdoms. Queen Thalith returned, expecting politics. Instead, she found Zaina stronger, sharper, unwilling to marry for diplomacy. "I gave my heart once," Zaina said. "What's left is not for barter." She created a new institution, part library, part fortress, part refuge. A place where girls told they were too much could grow into warriors and scholars. She called it the House of Fire and Stone. They came in droves, orphans, dreamers, exiles. each one drawn to her flame. One night, alone in the Chamber of Stars, she opened Kale's chest. Inside, a stone necklace, his knife, and a letter. "If I go before you, don't grieve too long. I'd have died 1,000 times for one day with you. If the gods allow it, I'll wait, somewhere beyond the dunes." She read it in silence. Years passed. Her body grew heavier, slower, but no one dared call her weak. They called her Stormother, Queen Reborn, the flame that would not die. And when her time came, she walked into the dunes alone. No crown, no guards. Only the necklace around her neck. They found her beneath the stars. At peace. They scattered her ashes at dawn. Not in grief, but in gratitude. For the daughter who became more than royalty. She became a legacy.